Okay, picking up where we left off at, when I said the square root would be taken on each side, because this is positive, we're going to have two answers for x. So we will have two x-intercepts for k of x. Okay, now we're going to scroll down here to problem 18. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, let me just check this out. I believe you wanted, what was that, 18b. Okay, 18b. It says solve using the extracting the square root method by hand. Remember to simplify your answers completely. Okay, the first thing we have to do here is take the square root of both sides. Now this will leave us x minus 3/5 on one side. And we took the square root over here. We know the square root of a negative would give us, it's going to be plus or minus. And then since it's negative, we know we're going to take out I. Now, with this square root of 7 over 25, that is the same thing as the square root of 7 over the square root of 25. So now we have x minus 3/5 is equal to plus or minus I times the square root of 7 all over. We know the square root of 25 is 5. So we will add 3/5 to both sides. And we will have x is equal to 3/5 plus or minus I square root 7 over 5. Now, because both of these have the same denominator, we can combine them. So we will have x is equal to 3 plus or minus I square root 7 all over 5. And that is our final answer. Now we come to 19. The only question from 19 was 19b. It says here, use completing the square to solve the equation by hand. Now we know we're completing the square, we need x squared and the x on one side. So we will add 15x on both sides. So we will have x squared plus 15x. We like to leave a little space, and that would equal 10. Now for completing the square, we would take whatever our b value is, which we know here is 15. We would divide by 2 and square that. Now we know 15 to the second power, if I'm not mistaken, that's 225. So we have 15 to the second power, which is 225, and 2 to the second power is 4. So we will add 225 over 4 to both sides. And then here we will have our parentheses squared is equal to, now you could put this in your calculator. And this will give you 265 over 4. Once you take 10 plus 225 over 4, it'll give you 265 over 4. And then this parenthesis on the left side, we know x will go here. And then we would take the number that we squared. We squared a positive 15 over 2. So it'd be plus 15 over 2. Now, our next step, we would have to take the square root of both sides. And we will have x plus 15 over 2 is equal to plus or minus. And what I want to do, I want to separate this square root. It would be the square root of 265 over the square root of 4. Now, with the square root of 265, we need to figure out if there's any perfect square in 265. It is not. But there is a perfect square with the square root of 4, which we know is 2. So we have x plus 15 over 2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 265 all over 2. Now we will subtract 15 over 2 on both sides. And we will have x is equal to negative 15 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 265 over 2. Now, if you notice here, we have the same denominator. So we can combine this. We had negative 15 plus or minus the square root of 265, all divided by 2. And this is our final answer. Now, we will scroll down. That was 19b. Now we're going to scroll to 20b. It says use the quadratic formula to solve the equation by hand. Okay, first of all, we need to get all of these terms on one side. So we would need to subtract 3/5 on both sides. So we would have x squared minus 3/5 x minus 3/5 equals 0. Now, the best way to do this problem is first, let's get rid of all these denominators. So we'll multiply everything by 5 because the common denominator of all these terms is 5. So we have 5x squared minus 3x because these 5's will simplify out. And then these 5's will simplify out and leave minus 3. And we know 5 times 0 is just 0. Now we have our a, b, and c. Our a is 5. Our b is negative 3. And our c is negative 3. So now we use the quadratic formula. We have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So we have x is equal to the opposite of b, which would be the opposite of negative 3, plus or minus negative 3 squared minus 4, a is 5, and c is negative 3. All over 2 times 5. Now, we know the opposite of negative 3 is 3, plus or minus the square root of, this is 9, negative 4 times 5 is negative 20, times a negative 3 is a positive 60, all over 10. Now, this will end up being 3 plus or minus the square root of 69, all over 10. Now, 69, there is no perfect square in 69, so our final answer is x is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 69, all over 10. That is our final answer. Now, we're going to move on to the next problem, which would be problem 21. It says use the quadratic formula to solve the equation by hand. Give 2 decimal places. So now, what we need to do is this here. We need to get all of these values on one side. But first, let's do the distributive property. This will give us 1.7x squared minus, we'll take 1.7 times 2.3, which will give us 3.91. And that's equal to 3.4 minus 2.8x. Now, we need to move all these values on one side. So we'll subtract 3.4 and add 2.8x on both sides. Now, on this side here, we know we'll bring down our 1.7x squared. And the like term, well, we know 2.8x. We'll just bring that down because there's no like term. But this negative 3.91 and negative 3.4, they are like terms. So that would give us a negative 7.31. And we know that equals 0. Now, we could get rid of these decimals by multiplying everything by 100. Let's just do that. So this will give us 170x squared plus 280x minus 731 is equal to 0. Now, we want to put this, we will have A is 170, B is 280, and C is negative 731. Now, we will put this in a quadratic equation. Now, we will have x, we know the opposite of b, we know b is 280, you can see that on your paper. So it'll be a negative 280 plus or minus the square root of, we had 280 squared, minus 4. Our A is 170, and our C is a negative 731. And that's all over 2 times A, which is 2 times 170. So we had negative 280 plus or minus the square root of, we have to take 280 squared, which will give us 78,400. And then we will have to take this negative 4 times 170 times a negative 731, which will give us a positive 497,080, all divided by 340. Now we're going to combine what's under the radical. So we will have, what's that, 78,400 plus the 497,080. And that would give us 575,480. And that's all divided by 340. Now, we need to put this in a calculator. Now, I'm going to tell you how you should put this in a calculator. First thing in your calculator, you should have negative 280 plus the square root of 575,480, and then divide all that by 340. Now that's one of your answers. The other answer would be negative 280 minus the square root of 575,480, all divided by 340. Now, in your calculator, you should type in negative 280 plus the square root of 575,480, and then press enter. Then divide that answer by 340. And that would give us, because it tells us to round to 2 decimal places, that would give us approximately 1.41, and it's positive. Now we go to the second value. We'll take negative 280 minus the square root of 575,480, and then divide that by 340. And this would give us a negative 3.05. And that is our final answer. Now I know in the back it has negative 3.06, but it's supposed to be a negative 3.05. Okay, now we come to problem 22. Now with 22, we're supposed to do problems C and D. And basically they want us to solve them using the most efficient method. Now what I would do here first, I would subtract 4 on both sides. So we have 5 times p minus 3 squared is equal to 3. Then I would divide each side by 5. And we will have p minus 3 parentheses squared equals 3/5. Now I would take the square root of both sides. And we will have p minus 3 is equal to, plus or minus, we can make this the square root of 3 over the square root of 5. Now, we know we cannot leave the square root of 5 in the denominator. So we'll multiply our numerator and denominator by the square root of 5. So we have p minus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 15 all over 5. The square root of 5 times square root of 5 is square root of 25, which is just 5. And then we will add 3 to both sides. So we have p is equal to 3 plus or minus the square root of 15 over 5. Now we could leave it like this, or we could change this 3 so to have a denominator of 5. So we know that will become 15 over 5 plus or minus the square root of 15 over 5. Now we can add them together. We have p is equal to 15 plus or minus the square root of 15 over 5. So this could be your answer, or this could be your answer.